Hello, hello. Today we are getting together to talk about rental fraud and scam prevention. Now, this is a critical topic, and there's a lot to go over. So I'm really pleased to say that we have an extra special guest today. We have Christina, who is one of TurboTenant's excellent security specialists. So she will be chiming in on the end of the presentation to talk about how TurboTenant helps fight fraud. But before then, we're going to talk more about the fraud that you might encounter as a landlord and what to do about it. Boiled down, there are going to be three main takeaways from today. I'm going to tell you all about rental fraud this year, including why it's on the rise. We're going to talk about different types of common rental fraud. And then, of course, I'm going to give you some tactics so that you can spot scams and avoid getting hoodwinked, essentially. So let's get started with the landscape as it stands, right? So when we talk about fraud, there are so many different things that we could bring up. But inherently in this case, we're really focusing on fraud that you would expect to see as a landlord. So while there is significant fraud that tenants encounter when they're trying to find a rental, that's not going to be the focus of today's session. If you want more information about that, we do have a survey at the very end of the presentation. Let me know. I'm always happy to throw together a presentation for you, but want to be very clear that we're focusing on fraud for landlords today. You might be wondering, well, how pervasive is rental fraud? How often does it really happen? And according to a recent survey from Dwellsy, it's very prevalent. Okay, so more than 40% of people have either lost money themselves or they know somebody who lost money because of a rental fraud. And actually, about a third of people have been directly impacted by rental fraud, having lost out themselves. When we calculate the actual impact, Americans are projected to lose 16.1 billion, that's with a B, billion dollars due to rental fraud this year. So it really pays to know what's out there and to be aware. I want to give you those tools without making you feel like you have to be hyper vigilant. But unfortunately, fraud is getting worse. There are a few reasons for that. Starting with the fact that rent keeps increasing. So when rent increases and wages stay stagnant, affording housing just gets that much harder, which can kind of encourage these kinds of crimes to unfold in greater numbers, unfortunately. We see a similar risk increase when unemployment rates rise because people always need somewhere to live. And unfortunately, in the current landscape, they don't always have a way to pay for it. I'm not saying that fraud is the answer, but I'm giving you the pieces of the puzzle as to why it happens. Also, prime real estate is super enticing to people. It's a status symbol. There are certainly a subsect of people who have that like keeping up with the Joneses fever, where they want to be where their peers are, where they perceive everyone else to be. And so they might be more likely to lie or to commit fraud if it means that they can get something that everybody will look on with envy, right? And of course, another reason that fraud is getting worse is because the ways of committing it are getting easier, frankly. So there are a lot of pieces of tech out there that make defrauding easy. For example, Photoshop is something that you can use for nefarious purposes. I don't know if you knew this, but you could Photoshop a pay stub to make it look different, to qualify for something that you otherwise wouldn't. And no longer is that something that you would need to have, in-depth knowledge about in order to put together. Instead, it's like a drag and drop, click, and bam, you've got a fraudulent pay stub. So that's why we're talking about this today, in addition to the fact that you guys requested the topic. It is actually getting worse. When we look to other property managers to figure out their experiences, a digital security company called Snap brought in all of their perspectives, and the vast majority are painting a pretty grim picture, right? So 85% of the 100 property managers surveyed said that the ease with which false documents can be obtained has increased the flood of fraud that they are seeing in their own businesses. 78% also attributed this to the rise in rents, as we've talked about. And then, of course, you have more people doing this digitally. And when you have less in-person contact with applicants, fraud gets easier to commit, frankly. This isn't to say that you should move everything offline. I don't think that's the answer, but it does mean that you need to have the tools in your disposal to be able to fight fraud firsthand. But let's talk about what types of fraud you should be looking out for. So as I mentioned at the jump, there are a variety of types of fraud. Today, we're going to focus on the three most common types of fraud. So that is, of course, rental application fraud, money wiring scams, and illegal subleases. If you're unfamiliar with any or all of these, don't worry, we'll be diving into each one individually. But for now, I would love to know, what type of fraud scares you the most? You have a little poll to pop up. Feel free to select your choice. Not all fraud is created equally. Some of them are easier to catch than others. So it'll be really interesting to see what you guys think. I've also thrown in an option there. If you are fearless, if you've never had a worry in your life about fraud, there is a response option for you. But also, it's okay to be scared about something that could cost you quite a bit and be a headache to unravel. So be honest, it's anonymous. I won't hold it against you if you have fears. I'll give you about 10 more seconds as we look through. It's really fun to be able to see the data come in live because it kind of shifts around, but so far it's panning out to be about what I expected, which is to say that a lot of you are scared of rental application fraud over all else. That makes sense. Next highest portion here is that you're scared of all of these equally. Again, I can't fault you for that. It's pretty scary when you're not sure who's on the other end of something and what to do, if you're going to break the law by doing what you want to do. So we're going to cover all of that for you today. All right. So let's start with the scariest thing for everybody, which is rental application fraud. So what is rental application fraud? Well, when I talk about it here, what I am talking about is somebody putting fraudulent information down on the rental application to qualify for your unit. So because of the prevalence of photo editing software and, businesses online that are willing to lie or produce fake information for an applicant, we have seen rental fraud increase. And this is arguably the most common type of fraud that you'll see in the industry. However, it's not created equal. So we can actually break down here where rental fraud is on the rise. So this is a list based on 1.5 million pay stubs plus bank statements that Snapped scanned. Snapped is the security company we cited earlier. As you can see here, Atlanta has the highest rate of rental fraud application across the US at 17.9%. That is a pretty startlingly high number. Okay. And across the rest of the metros, I mean, it's not painting a pretty picture. That's why it really pays to know what you need to look out for. So let's dive into some of the types of rental fraud. So this can really encapsulate a couple different realms of the rental application. So you could have a pay stub be fake or income verification being defrauded. Maybe they're providing fake references, either professionally or from a previous landlord. Or if you're not doing tenant screening or pulling a background check, they could be misreporting their credit, criminal, or eviction history. We do have an asterisk on eviction, if only because you can't collect eviction history in all states, so that might not pop up for you depending on where you live, but it is something that pops up frequently when we have these kinds of conversations. Also, fun little tidbit, if by fun I mean like kind of sad. Pre-pandemic, property managers were able to detect 90% of fraudulently altered applications. They have now felt less confident in their abilities. That number has dropped to 75%. Okay. That is a pretty significant drop. With that in mind, have you ever had someone falsify their rental application? We have a quick poll to determine that, I believe. You could also let us know in the chat. No poll. Okay, fine. So with that, let us know in the chat, have you had someone falsify their rental application? I will say, LS, I disagree with the idea that tenants are professional liars. I don't think that's a great way to approach this kind of situation. There are fraudsters out there on both sides of the fence. There are landlords who defraud people. There are tenants who defraud people. So it's really about being aware of the signs and making sure you can attend to them appropriately. Chai asked, is there somewhere where you can run an eviction in all of the states? No, some states don't allow you to run evictions, so you wouldn't be able to pull that on a national level. Otherwise, let's see. A lot of people are saying, yes, they have encountered some kind of rental fraud. Robin is in all caps, so I know that that's a story. And a couple people saying no. All right. Yeah, it's a mixed bag, but it seems like most people have some kind of experience with a fake rental application, whether that's references and a fake security number or something else. Scarily enough, some people are saying, I'm not sure. I'm not sure if I have. Yeah, it gets to be tricky. It gets to be very, very hard. That's why you have to do your due diligence and use the tips from today, hopefully, to combat that. Let's talk about income verification fraud a little bit more. So, as somebody mentioned in the chat, there are people out there who make it their business to capitalize on this shady industry where they are willing to put together a fake pay stub for less than $5. Usually takes like less than 5 minutes. However, there is hope on the horizon. There are signs that you can see when something has been edited. Specifically, you should look out for perfectly rounded pay, right? It makes way more sense if I come to you and say, hey, I really want to rent your unit. I make, around $4,000 a month, and I hand over my pay stub and it says $3,997.72. Okay, that's more realistic versus if I come to you and I hand you a pay stub for $4,000 even. I mean, who among us really gets a pay stub that's just an even number? That doesn't really happen. So that should be a red flag that jumps out to you immediately. Also, when you're looking over the pay stub, it should look professionally done, which means the numbers and characters should align. The columns should be straight. There should be nothing that looks even the slightest bit unprofessional because this is supposedly coming from a business. So that's something to bear in mind too. Another thing to look out for is people who are using zeros and O's interchangeably. So I know sometimes the difference, especially if you're not looking at both of them next to each other, can be hard to spot. So get a little bit of an eagle eye. Make sure you just remember this tidbit because it's pretty important, and you would be surprised how many times that's the thing that alerts people to fraud versus anything else. And of course, another thing to be looking out for is consistent basic information across the pay stub. So you want to make sure that the person's name, the business address, the business name, that is staying consistent. And that means the same spelling, that means the same spacing. Take the name TurboTenant, for example. Our company name is all one word. But if at the top of my pay stub, I have it as all one word, and then somewhere else I have it as 2 words, that's really fishy because my company knows its name. We wouldn't be doing that unless somebody else is getting in the mix and altering the document. Okay. So you know some of the signs to look out for. How do you fight back? I would say, and you'll hear me say it quite a few times in this presentation, you're going to need to do your due diligence. So that means taking the time to look at that pay stub and evaluate it thoroughly, and then follow up and make sure that the information is accurate. You can do that relatively quickly with a couple of Google searches. So I want you to look up the company and make sure that it actually exists and that it's based somewhere that makes sense. The world is big. The United States does not have all of the companies in the world. It's possible to be a remote worker and have a company based in Germany or wherever else. However, if I come to you and I say, hey, I'm a trucker, I'm a US trucker, and I just drive coast to coast, but I want a rental, and my company is supposedly based in Japan, like, let's really break that down and make sure that everything is coming together in a way that is logical. And if it doesn't, that should give you pause. So when you go to look up the company, you should also look at their website. Make sure that it seems detailed and realistic. Again, this should be a company that exists outside of the realm of your rental application. So it should look like an actual verifiable business. That means, there are going to be different sections of the website. There's going to be contact information. There's going to be maybe an about us or something selling their product, but it should be a whole fully fledged entity that you are just looking at because it's actually connected to your tenant, right? If it seems like a sham or their website is only 1 page long and it doesn't really have any information on it, if anything starts to give you pause, that's a good time to lean into your instincts and dig further. In this case, what I would recommend is finding an office phone number. You are allowed to reach out to your applicants' employers to verify that they are employed with that company. So typically you're going to want to talk to HR, whether that means you use the phone number that's on the website and you ask to speak to HR, or you specifically find an HR phone number, give them a call, let them know the applicant's name, and ask if the applicant currently works in that position, as applicable, right? Like if you're looking this over and you know that they've changed jobs, don't ask that question because they don't work there, but you can say, hey, did Krista ever work at TurboTenant? And our HR team should be able to say, yes, she did. Or no, she didn't, if I was full of lies. But I do. I'm working right now. So make sure that you are doing this, especially if an applicant seems too good to be true, or if there's anything else that is giving you pause ahead of this point. If you find that you have received fake income information, there are a couple of things to keep in mind. First of all, you want to make sure that you are being cautious in how you communicate. You do not want to just approach the person and say, hey, you gave me fake information. There are a few reasons for that. One, it rarely pays to be that combative in a business setting. Two, source of income verification, source of income is something that can be considered a protected class and is in several states, which means that you can't discriminate against someone based on how they earn their money. With that in mind, if you start to try and approach someone aggressively about potential fraud, you might find yourself in a situation where you are discriminating against them or being perceived as discriminating against them, which can be just as sticky. So instead, what I would urge you to do is communicate. I want you to first actually follow up with all of their references. So anytime you have an application coming in, you should be asking for past landlord references along with any kind of professional references that they might have. You want to get a full picture of who's trying to live in your rental, right? So once you do that, follow up with the numbers that they give you. Don't just collect it and do nothing with it. That is a big mistake that I see landlords making all the time. They think, well, if the person gave me the information, I'm good to go. I don't need to do anything else. But that's simply not true. You do need to follow up. You need to make sure that you're calling these people and that you have a sense of who the tenant is. Once you've done that, maybe that'll shed light on the situation. Maybe you still need more information. Either way, what you want to do is communicate to the applicant that you're having trouble verifying their proof of income. You can just do it like that. You could just say, hey, Krista, I'm having some issues verifying your income with the documents that you've submitted. Could you provide me your bank statement and a 1099 miscellaneous form since you said you were a freelancer by December 18th? Okay, so what I want to break that down for you. I asked for specific documentation. I told them exactly what documentation I wanted, and I gave them a date. If Krista did not fulfill those obligations and get me that documentation by the date in question, I could then release them and continue looking for a better suited applicant. Okay, but it's really important that you really outline everything that they need to do, because while this will be an extra hassle for honest renters, if they're motivated to live in your rental, they will do it. Fraudsters will not be able to move forward, and they will likely leave you alone at this point, okay? Because you're asking too many questions. They see that you can't be defrauded, so they're going to move on most of the time. All right. You might be wondering, what kind of additional documentation should I request? It's going to depend on the exact situation that you have with that unique renter. However, here's some recommendations that I would give to you. I'd say ask for one or multiple of the following. You could ask for their income statement, which is that W-2. That is, of course, an IRS tax form that employers complete for each employee. So if somebody is a full-time or a part-time worker, they should have a W-2 that they can pass over to you, right? Here you can see total annual wages and also get some insight into the overall income status because it's going to show a full year's worth of salary. Also, having a W-2 means that the person is employed, or at least was employed in that location when the form was issued. So that's another just little piece of the puzzle to put in as you go. Alternatively, you could ask for a 1099 miscellaneous. So this is the form that freelancers often receive for completing various works from companies over the year. So independent contractors and people who are self-employed will typically, will receive this form because that's how they report their taxes. Don't be afraid if you have an applicant who has kind of a non-traditional pay structure that they receive. You really just want to make sure that they have enough money coming in to pay your rent, and assess it using some of these documents so that you feel good moving forward. But it doesn't have to be a cookie cutter experience. You can really mix and match depending on what's available. All right. Other things, of course, we know what a bank statement is. That's going to capture the applicant's history of deposits and also kind of shed some light on any dangerous spending habits they might have. Just bear in mind that this particular documentation is a little bit intrusive because of that spending habits portion. So there are other ways to verify. You don't have to jump straight to bank statements, but it is an option if you want to collect it. You could also ask for employment verification for an apartment renting. This is something that back in the day I did. So I was looking for an apartment. I had just gotten a new job and I went to my boss and I said, hey, I need proof that I make enough money to afford this apartment, but I don't have any pay stubs to use because I just started. And my boss wrote up a letter saying, hey, Krista works at this company. This is how much she's set to make per month. So that should work for your rental. And it did. I was able to move in, which was really nice. We do have a template for this. I've linked it out in the blog in the corner here. So when you get a copy of this deck, if you have a tenant or an applicant who's interested in providing an employment verification for apartment renting, they can do this for free, right? We have a template. They could just download it, get it over, and then streamline the rest of the process. Right, a couple more here. Of course, a Social Security benefit statement is an official letter from the Social Security Administration, and it outlines the monthly benefits that your applicant receives. So it's a good way to establish whether or not an individual can pay for your rent if they're receiving retirement, disability, or supplemental security income benefits. Of course, we also have the ever classic federal income tax return. So this is a 1040 form. It has a section to report annual income, and this will give you a picture of all sources of income, including assets and non-salaried positions that are coming in and helping to bolster the applicant's bottom line. So the tenant can either request a photocopy of this form or a computer transcript of the information through the IRS. Last example here is an unemployment statement. It could be you have an applicant who looks great and everything else is fantastic, but they don't have a position currently. They're collecting unemployment. You can get a copy of that statement and use that as proof of income. So in order to do this, the applicant would just need to provide the statement that the state sends to them. So it's really passing along a document that they receive. And these are guaranteed funds, but you're going to want to double check the dates on the statement to see how long the benefits last. Because if it doesn't last the full term with the lease that you're looking to have signed, it might not be a good fit. Or at least you might need to ask additional questions. This is all well and good, but you might be saying, Krista, what if they're already moved in? You've opened my eyes with this presentation. I didn't do my due diligence. Somebody's in there and I'm not sure if they should be. The good news is that you still have options. However, you're likely going to need help. So before you reach out to your tenant, I want you to gather all of your documentation. So that's going to be all of the rental application along with any of the forms that you had them submit. And then I want you to go talk to a lawyer. The reason for that is that this is likely to lead to an eviction, which is costly and time consuming. And having all of your ducks in a row before you talk to the lawyer will help streamline that process. Nobody enjoys the eviction process, but unfortunately, that's usually how fraud is dealt with because what else can you do? All right. So I threw a lot at you there. I'm going to take a look in the chat and see if there are any questions that we have. Okay, I'm going to leave some of the Q&As to the end. Looks like Jonathan is handling one. All right, and some suggestions in the chat. Kyle, I like your suggestion to request a transcript from the IRS. It could be obtained instantly online. That's a great tip. All right. Anything else? Samantha, great tip. Make sure you have the signed authorization to contact the employer. Most online applications will include it. Good idea. And of course, Amber Kelly. Love Amber Kelly. She's a wonderful landlord up in Northern Colorado. She says, a lot of the times you can verify through public databases. I often ask about discrepancies, and there is often a decent reason that we can work through. Good way to go about it. All right. One more question I'll tackle for now. How are you able to tell if a fake social security number is being used? So I would highly recommend tenant screening because tenants can't use a fake social security number when it goes through a tenant screening service like what we offer here at TurboTenant. When they try and plug in fake information, TransUnion can't find them. because it's fake. So they are not able to move forward. And at that point, you have more insight. You're like, something is wrong if somebody can't produce a tenant screening report. So again, not to paint with too broad a brush, it could require a conversation. Maybe they misentered the information, but that is a good way to tell if something fake is being used. All right. Let's carry on with money wiring. It made it sound way more fun than it is, but unfortunately, money wiring scams are also on the rise. So let's take a look at this little chart here. This comes from a report from the Transactional Records Access Clearinghouse, and they track wire fraud charges and convictions. We are projected to reach record levels of that in this fiscal year, which is quite alarming. So here we are in 2023. This is based on the first 8 months of the year. You can see it's already quite high compared to everything else on the chart. And specifically, the report states that the total number of prosecutions with wire fraud as the lead charge are projected to reach 1,304 by the end of the fiscal year in September, the highest on record since this company began tracking these data points in the 1980s. So this particular chart doesn't only focus on the rental industry, it's wire fraud as a whole across all industries, but it does help to contextualize the crime at hand. When we talk about wire fraud in rental spaces, it most often comes up right after the application is received or right before when you're asking for fees and things to be paid. So typically, the fraudster will send you some kind of either straight up wire or a check. This is also very common with checks that are worth more than what you are asking for. Okay, so let's say that I have a rental and all of the fees to move in and get started, everything shakes out to $2,000 even. A fraudster might send me a wire for $4,000. Okay, or they might even be a little bit less bold. They'll do $2,500. And then they'll say, oh, can you wire me back the extra money? Where the fraud comes in is the check or the wire was never any good. So it never clears my bank account. If I say, oh yeah, sure, I'll give you that extra $500 back. I send them $500, assuming that their check is going to clear. It doesn't. I lose out on $500 and I am sad and I cry in my rental. Like that's kind of how it shakes out. It's quite pervasive. It's something to really be on the lookout for. To that end, I am curious, have you ever had somebody wire more money to you than what you were requiring for move-in? Let us know with this little poll. Oh, okay, people are answering. Love to see it. We'll also, of course, talk about how you can combat this because unfortunately, I don't expect this type of crime to stop. I think it's just going to continue getting worse. So we have to be vigilant and thoughtful as we move through these kinds of procedures. All right, 5 more seconds for you if you want to chime in on the poll. It's looking pretty interesting. Okay. So it appears that we've got a 90-10 split. 90% of you have never had someone try to wire more money than what was required. 10% though have had this experience. So if you are one of those people in the 10% category, please share in the chat what happened, if you accepted that money, if you lost money, just help share the wealth so that this community of landlords can take those learnings and move forward if you feel comfortable. Okay. Woo. So when it comes to money wiring fraud, thankfully, this one is quite a bit easier in my opinion to fight back against, because the best way to fight back is to not accept wire transfers. Excuse me. Yeah, I mean, I know that there are some situations where it's unavoidable, but I think that just circumventing that entire transfer system would be best. Instead, you can require people to pay through an online portal like TurboTenant. We have a little cute UI here so you can see what that might look like when you get a rent payment. That's nice because then the money goes through. We'll talk a little bit more about how we handle security on the back end at the very end of this presentation, but it's more secure than something like a check coming through, which could bounce and just disappear. And that way you don't have to play around with a fraudster and be like, oh yeah, I'll give you this extra money that you sent for no reason. In fact, if somebody does try and send you extra money, let's talk about that. So let's say you've accepted it already, okay? I'm sorry that happened. You should really keep close tabs on the funds in your account, right? Don't spend any part of it. Don't return any portion of it. Like, you need to make sure that that money clears before you move forward. If the check bounces, reach out to the applicant immediately. You need to ask them to either provide the funds a different way by a specific date, or consider sending them a formal notice, like a pay or quit notice, depending on your local landlords and tenant laws. Okay. So what I would recommend is, of course, not accepting wire transfers at all. If you have to accept them, or that's a part of your business model, just make sure that you let them clear all the way before you do anything. And if you get somebody sending something that seems too high, reach out to them immediately. You don't have to wait for it to clear if it's more than what you were asking for. And that might be enough to have them abandon the plot. So don't be afraid to communicate. Just don't be too combative. Okay. Pretty clean and easy. So now we're going to talk about illegal subleases. Once again, let me do a quick sweep of the chat to see if there are any questions we should tackle right away, or if we want to save some for the end. Looks like some advice here. So Jim has deposits go into a deposit-only account. That seems like a smart way to go. Amber says she's had to use wire transfers for many international students at their local college. The students are here, parents are across the ocean. Do you have another way to do this? In that case, that's one of those situations where it's unavoidable. And I would just say, pay attention to the amount being sent in, right? If it looks on level and it's exactly what you were asking for, that should be okay. Just make sure you're monitoring the funds and that they completely clear before you spend them, or otherwise move the person in. That would be my biggest suggestion. And once again, if they send you something that is more than what you were requesting, reach out to them, let them know that it's more than what you're requesting. You'll wait to see how the check clears or the wire clears, and you might need to touch base and have another conversation. But wire transfers aren't evil for that very reason. It's just something that can get tricky and requires a little bit more monitoring in order to ensure that you are not scammed. All right. Okay. Lots of different options here. People are talking about how they accept rent. Samantha doesn't allow wiring. That's very fair. Okay. And all right. David asks, how can one access your tenant screening service? So if you go on to TurboTenant.com, you will see all of the features that we offer. You can sign up and use our tenant screening for free. Your applicants will pay the application fee, and you can run it through there. So it's pretty easy. Go to our website. I will drop it in the chat right now. Oops, I almost put a 0 for a no. Check it out. We offer this service because we know that it's needed. So take a look. But for now, let's go ahead and say we are talking about illegal subleases. All right, we're going to keep scooting. So if you're unfamiliar with subleases, I'm happy to illuminate. Inherently, we are talking about a situation in which your tenant signs a lease with you, and then they secretly relist the property as if they are the landlord. And what's really important here is to remember that subleasing is not the same as subletting. Okay, these are two separate situations. Subletting is required in some states. That's where a new renter is found and they sign a new contract with the landlord. All right. Subleasing is when a tenant finds a new renter and signs a contract with the tenant. So what you should hear in that is that sublease means that you are not getting a new contract as a landlord. Subletting, you are getting a new contract, you are involved. Okay. As I mentioned, some states require you to allow subletting. We're not going to focus on that too much, but I just want to underline that it is different than subleasing. But how can we fight back against illegal subleasing? Well, first of all, I assume all of us look like this when we're ready to fight back against illegal subleasing. Really, what you want to make sure you do is it's a couple different steps. One, make sure that your lease agreement specifically forbids subleasing without your written consent. If that isn't already in your lease agreement, you can add it through an addendum. That's always an option. If you add it through an addendum, you and your tenant will have to sign it. Excuse me. Assuming that they are not illegally subleasing, that shouldn't be an issue. This isn't the same as, some of the stickier addendums that roll out that can give your tenant some anxiety, but just want to make sure that you have it listed out in your lease. Your lease agreement should have all of these kinds of situations explained and outlined as much as possible to avoid any kind of nuance in the conversation as it applies to scams and fraud. All right. But let's say that you're worried that your tenant has subleased the apartment or the unit. You want to reach out to them in writing to ask if they are illegally subleasing the rental, along with any reason why you might believe this to be true. So let's say I have been noticing a lot of the same cars, but none of the cars that my tenant had put down on their application as being owned by them, pulling up in the driveway, staying for, long periods of time. And it's given me some suspicious feelings. At that point, I would reach out to my tenant and I would say, hey, Krista, I've been noticing a lot of cars that are parking in your lot regularly, but these are not cars that you claimed on your rental application. Are you subleasing the unit? The reason you want this in writing is because you can use this documentation if you do have to go to court. So having documentation is really smart if you ever have any kind of situations unfold, whether you end up going to court or just need it to, organize a situation for your own peace of mind. Make sure that you're having documentation in as many different forms as possible. Okay. Now, if you don't have a subleasing clause in your existing lease and you're worried that somebody is subleasing right now, you can still reach out, and you still should. Just remind your tenants that you need to know who's living at the property, because there could be possible insurance issues and there could be local occupancy limits that are getting violated based on who's moved in. So don't be afraid to reach out, even if you don't currently have this language in your lease. I would just say either add it through an addendum, or once the lease is up, make sure that you are bolstering it with this kind of information so that it's really clear the next time around. All right. So once you reach out to them, they should answer you in writing, and they will say yes or no. If they say no, then just keep an eye out. Don't do anything drastic. Don't feel like you need to put up security cameras or otherwise infringe on their right to privacy, but do make sure that you're paying attention to, again, any of the signs that you picked up on that something might have been amiss. You could also remind them that, like, hey, guests can only stay X number of days before they become considered tenants. Like, you can really lean on the language in your lease and on the stipulations therein to make sure that you're protected and get them to cure the behavior or otherwise make an adjustment accordingly. If they are illegally subleasing, you have a couple of questions that you need to ask yourself. You need to know if you want the new tenant to stay. If you want them to go, how much notice are you going to give them? All right. Now, that second question is going to also be impacted by your local state and landlord laws, because, your local landlord tenant laws, because each state and locality has its own requirements regarding how much notice you need to give someone before you get them out of a property, even in this kind of situation where it's an illegal sublease, right? So look up your local laws, make sure that you know if you do want them to bounce, how much notice you are required to give them and in what form. Okay. If you decide that you want to keep them, I highly, highly, highly recommend that you screen them. So you're going to want to make sure that they actually qualify to live in your rental. And if they do qualify, create a new lease and sign it with them directly. Okay. Cut out the bad tenant and work with the good one if you are inclined to keep them around, right? If you do not want them in your rental, you need to send your original tenant a lease violation notice, or otherwise like a cure or quit notice, depending on your locality. In that cure or quit notice, which is basically saying you need to fix this behavior by a certain time or get out of here, you need to establish a timeline to have the subleaser move out. This is once again going to connect to how much notice you need to give them. So don't be afraid to look up your local laws. Jonathan in the ether, if you have the link to our state local laws, that would be really wonderful. We do have some notes on there. That's a great place to start your research, but I'm going to encourage you to also look at your government sites wherever you are based, wherever your rental is based, to ensure that you have all the information you need to make the right decision here. All right. Once again, we are at a pause point, so let me take a quick look in the chat and Q&A to see if there's anything we need to tackle right now. Okay. Do we have verbiage for a no subleasing clause? I believe we can. I have some thoughts on that. I will circle back and tell you. Okay, and any questions here? What if they let people live there and there's no lease at all? That is a really hard situation, Barbara. I would say if they just allow guests to come in and live in the property, you should have language in your lease to define your guest policy inherently, where you can say, hey, you are welcome to have guests, but if somebody stays more than, let's say 7 nights consecutively, you will be considered a tenant and will be required to do X, Y, Z. So really, again, leaning on the language in your lease, making sure that you have a guest policy and a subleasing policy is best practice. Also, when you sublet, are all of those people on one lease? They don't have to be. There could be multiple leases. Let's say there's a roommate situation, and you're bringing multiple people. You could have multiple leases when you sublet. Just depends on what makes sense for your rental. Okay. Couple of questions here. What would you recommend if a tenant is limited with English and so can't make a TurboTenant account and therefore not be able to pay rent online? He pays rent by check each month and it's a headache. None of his checks have bounced and it drops off at a personal home. Oh yeah, Matt, that is tricky. I would say a couple of thoughts. One, if you feel comfortable and the tenant is willing, you could set up his account on his behalf and make it very easy for him to just come in and pay rent. If he has a bank account and it's all set up and ready to go. So, okay, half step back. I am Matt, I am the landlord. I set up an account for my tenant and then I say, hey, put in your bank account information. If he can't do that, totally valid. There might be services available to help him navigate the process and make sure that he gets all of his bank account information in there. And then he could set up auto pay and just have it run automatically so that he doesn't have to drop off a check. That would be my biggest recommendation is, providing some assistance so that he's able to just get it set up and not have to worry about it. If that's not the solution, then you could still look at different ways to collect rent online, or I guess if he just cannot do an online manner, paper checks are a way to go. It is quite inconvenient, as you're finding, but definitely trying to help him out and set up an account would be great. People steal your ad. Okay, so we're not going to talk too much about other people stealing rentals because that's more focused on tenants getting scammed than a landlord getting scammed, which is the focus of this talk. I will say though, if you see that other people are stealing your ad, let us know. I mean, we have an entire security team dedicated to trying to eradicate these errant listings. We have an email address where you can send in notification. I believe it's badlisting@turbotenant.com, where you can let us know and we'll do our due diligence to make sure that we take care of it. Okay. But it's definitely something that you want to look out for. Something that you can do ahead of that is to have watermarks on your pictures. Maybe that has the actual address, maybe that has your last name, maybe that has your LLC's name, but that way there's something that gives people pause if they were to see it outside of the context of your ad, to alert them, just in case it pops up somewhere that's not related to TurboTenant. All right. Let's keep moving on so we can talk about fraud fighting best practices. So what I want you to remember is that, yes, there is a lot of fraud out there, but there's some common behaviors amongst fraudsters so that you have some things to pinpoint as you navigate trying to fill your rental. I want you to be really careful of people who are willing to rent your property without seeing it in person or completing a video tour. Okay. Like, I know that was really big, especially in the height of the pandemic, that people were just jumping into rentals. But let it give you an appropriate amount of pause, because being willing to just rent out somewhere that you haven't seen is it's tricky, right? There are situations like with Amber's international students where maybe they're coming in and they don't have a chance to see it before they get there in person. They want somewhere to live. But if it's someone who's like, yeah, I live in your town and I do all the things, I don't need to see it. I'll just move in. I'll just send you the money. Pause. Red flag. Try and evaluate the situation. Okay. If someone is out of the country and they want to send a cashier's check, that doesn't automatically mean that they're bad or that they're fraudsters. There are legitimate reasons for people to use cashier's check, but I do want you to be cautious nonetheless and try and protect yourself as much as possible. See if there are any other of the signs of scams that we've talked about today going on, and use that information as a comprehensive picture of this person trying to move into your rental. And of course, if somebody is trying to provide a payment that is more than the agreed upon price, that is sketchy. That is strange. Ask questions. All right. Lastly, if they are trying to instill a sense of urgency in you, if they're like, no, you need to answer me by today, like I need to know right now, I'm ready to move in tomorrow. People often want to move fast so that everybody else doesn't have time to think about the situation, because there's just this sense of urgency. You just have to go. No, build in time to pause. Pause so that you don't make mistakes or decisions that later down the road really impact you negatively. Don't fall for a false sense of urgency. Okay. When it comes to avoiding scams, there are several things at your disposal. First off, you always want to screen tenants to check their history. If you can check their eviction history amongst everything else, depending on your state laws, do it. You want to get a full picture of who's trying to move in. I would also say, do not accept a check or wire or anything that is more than the agreed upon amount. If you can help it, don't deposit it, return it immediately. Let them know that you're only going to accept what you guys have outlined as being owed. Also, do not be afraid of making your screening criteria public. So that means, like, in your listing, you could say looking for credit scores over 600 and that's the easiest one that doesn't violate any potential fair housing. So something like that, right? Where you're outlining, these are the things that I need. Either you make it or you don't. Okay. Of course, as we said earlier, I want you to follow up with references. So I want you to both ask for references and then actually follow up with them. I want you to be looking up the company online and making sure that it's real. I want you to reach out to the company and verify their employment. As Samantha mentioned, you can get approval for this through the online rental application, certainly through TurboTenant at least. So highly recommend us. But make sure that you are doing your due diligence and you've crossed all your T's and dotted all of your I's so that you feel confident about who's trying to move in. Lastly, once someone's moved in, make sure that you're conducting regular inspections. That's going to be the way that you'll see if somebody is illegally subleasing or if something shady is going on. By being a regular presence at your rental properties, you mitigate the risk of things happening that you don't know are happening. And that is really important when you're conducting a business like this. One last little plug on this slide. Premium TurboTenant subscribers have access to something called Income Insights. Income Insights is a screening tool through TransUnion, which inherently takes what the applicant has reported as their income and compares that to TransUnion's database about their income. So it can let you know if it's about it could let you know if the tenant's self-reported income is about equal to what they see in their database, lower than what they see in their database, higher than what they see in their database, so that you can make the most logical choice for your rental based on the information that you're getting. Okay. You've heard a lot of my voice. So I am really, really pleased to introduce Christina. Christina is one of our security specialists here at TurboTenant. She is doing the work to fight fraud every single day, and she's going to tell us a little bit about how we do that here at TurboTenant.
Yes, hello. Like Krista said, my name is Christina. I'm a security specialist here at TurboTenant, and I do work with both landlords and renters on a day-to-day basis. But most importantly, I'm just a part of a team that makes sure our platform stays safe for all of our users. So I'm very excited to be here and interact with you all. So with that being said, how does TurboTenant protect landlords and tenants? Well, before any real estate listings hit the online market, we do rigorously verify them, and we implement multiple strategies to combat fraud on our platform. So we use both automated and machine learning and manual employee reviews. So to dive into that a little bit without giving too much away, the automated machine learning has maintained an accuracy rate above 98%. And the manual employee reviews have an accuracy rate above 95%, which is really good because the industry standard is 92. So we are well above that, and we are continuously working to stay on top of that. But we also host webinars such as this one, where Krista does a wonderful job educating our users on housing scams and essential practices for conducting background and credit checks, which are crucial to protect yourself as a landlord when finding the right tenant. You definitely want to be able to verify the information that they presented you so that it's true and accurate before moving forward with them. That way you're not left in a situation you don't want to be left in. We also partner with Plaid and Stripe, which, if you don't know, they are leaders in the financial industry. And they work to keep all of the payment information on the platform safe and private. So they are definitely the top of their game. So we enjoy, getting to work with them. But with all of that in mind, you can trust that a vast majority of attempted fraud on our platform is stopped in its tracks before it gets out to, public domain and to the point of no return. So, yeah. And if you have any questions about, TurboTenant and its processes, definitely feel free to link them in the chat, and we're happy to answer those questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Christina. Really good to have you in the mix. So we do a lot of work here to keep you and tenants safe. We've talked a lot about various ways that you can keep yourself safe and things to look out for. Once again, just going to steal a little moment to plug TurboTenant. We have all of the tools you need, from tenant screening and income verification to managing rent payments, day-to-day business, maintenance requests, etc. If you haven't signed up yet, today is the best day to do it. Go ahead and you can join our mobile app. That's really nice, Landlord on the Go. If you want to take it to the next level and unlock income insights, go premium. Grab a premium subscription. You can see what works best for you. Move forward, and you will have access to income insights moving forward, right? So it won't retroactively apply to people you've screened, but anybody else who comes in, you'll get that extra bit of information so you can feel really confident about who's trying to move in. With that, I'm going to look at the questions. So we're not completely done yet. We do have an ending poll if we want to pop it while I look at these. That would be lovely. Okay. Thank you. So let us know how we did as we answer some of your questions. All right. First off, Robin asked, do you have verbiage for a no subleasing clause? If you don't have it, but you have occupants in the lease, is that sufficient? Oh, but if you don't have a subleasing clause, but you list out who's on the lease, does that work? I would say best practice would be to have a dedicated clause for it. Verbiage I would recommend, and please bear in mind, I am just a good-looking researcher. I am not a lawyer. So, run this through the appropriate channels. But I would just clearly outline that you do not give permission for subleasing or subletting, even though the terms are different. We've talked about that. But you could throw both of them in and just say, I do not consent to having either of these things happen without my explicit written permission as the landlord. If you sublease without my permission, I will be sending a notice to cure or quit. You will have X number of days to move the person out, and you will be fined X amount of dollars, right? Outlining the consequences of that kind of action helps to prevent it from happening as often as possible. It's not perfect, nothing is, but it will at least, give fraudsters some pause before they fully go at it and try and move somebody in. If you just have listed out who the occupants are in the lease, that's okay. The reason that I would say bolstered up with an actual addendum is just because, or I should say a clause, just because it makes it easier if you do have to go to court, if you have something very clear that you can point to and say like, no, this is where I told them, and they signed the lease saying that they would not do this. They understood the consequences, so thus they need to be held accountable. Okay. Onika, is there a way to report broken leases to the 3 credit bureaus? Ooh, that's a good question. Possibly. I would want to know why. Like, I really question. So I would advise that you question why you want to tell them. Like, is it a situation where the lease was broken and you feel wronged and you're trying to like exact revenge? In that case, is it worth your time to do that? Because most likely a lease break is not going to necessarily impact their credit. What would impact their credit is if they owed you rent, or if they broke the lease and just like didn't pay any of the associated fees or whatever you've outlined in your lease. You can report on a monetary level. But just breaking a lease is not something that a credit bureau is going to necessarily take into account. Is there a limit on the penalty fees charging them for subleasing? Check your local landlord state laws, because the answer is likely yes, depending on where you live. On a national level, hard to say. Each locality operates as its own kind of little kingdom is the word that comes to mind. So check your local laws, make sure you're in the right before you put anything in the lease. Otherwise, you risk getting into trouble yourself. All right. Let's see what else here. Do you have any tips for fake social security numbers that do return a credit or background report? We've seen these more recently. Ooh, very interesting. In my research, when this pops up, it means that they've used someone else's social security number. So it might not be theirs, which means really checking in on their basic information is important. If you suspect that there's some kind of fraud, if you get some of those feelings, you get some hesitation based on the tips we've given you today, I would recommend trying to get their like a tax form, their tax return, something that would have the social security number on it, because while you're not going to see it, let's say if you move through TurboTenant, it's a lot harder to fake a tax form, a tax return with a fake social than anything else, because it has to look a very specific way. It's standardized. The IRS has it on lock as far as what that looks like. So get more documentation if you think that it's an issue. Eric has a piece of advice. I often find it's hard to find evictions on screenings online. Fair, especially depending on where you live. He recommends checking local clerk of court sites when possible. So that's a tip. That's something to know. Okay. All right. Edwin is asking, why does it take time for the TurboTenant to deposit the money into your account after the tenant has paid through the portal? The reason for this is that we're going through Stripe and we're making sure that the funds are actually moving. So it just physically takes some time for that to happen. I know we're in a digital age and it feels like everything can just go at a snap, but there is still security on the back end, and being more secure takes some time. So thus it's not going to be an immediate situation where they pay through TurboTenant and you immediately have it right in that second. We have to make sure that the fund's clear. That means Stripe is talking to their bank, and then Stripe is talking to your bank when it goes into your account. Ross asked, where can I report a professional fraudster who goes through Zillow looking for properties to rent, then matches her paying client whose data she's massaged with the unsuspecting landlord? So there is an online fraud site that you can report it to. Let me find it for you really fast. It is with I want to say the FBI, because they have an online crimes division. So let me grab that for you. And this is critical if you see somebody who's acting up and they just keep, especially if you like this, see them continuing to act up and they are not getting any kind of response from the police, you can report it to the FBI Internet Crime Complaint Center or contact the Federal Trade Commission. So let me grab both of these links for you here. I will drop them in the chat. That one is for the FBI, and this one is for the Federal Trade Commission. That would be my recommendation for you. Yep, and Onika is exactly right. If you pay for premium with TurboTenant, you have rents deposited to your account in 3 business days, which is pretty sweet. Oh, and Jonathan has also dropped a link for reporting fraudsters. That is wonderful. Thank you very much. Okay. Lots of good information, but I'm not seeing questions here. In terms of reporting to credit bureaus, you would contact them directly. If you need to report something to them, they'll ask for documentation as needed, but you do that by reaching out to each credit bureau individually. Guys, thank you so much for being here today. I really appreciate your time and attention. If you have any other questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. We'll send you a little survey after this wraps. You can let us know what you'd like us to cover next. Otherwise, have a wonderful Thursday, and we will see you at the next one. Bye.